speak to you all. And then once he is done, then we will have our media witnesses come up and share their observations. We'll start with Mr. Murphy and then Mr. Clay, who have more experience doing these things. But we will wait for Director Crow to come in, and then we'll start from there.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Scott Crow. I'm the director of the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. Today, the Oklahoma Department of Corrections carried out the court-ordered sentence of James Coddington, who was convicted of murder in the first degree. Inmate Coddington received his last meal at 5:30 p.m. on August 24th and chose to have a spiritual advisor in the chamber with him. The execution process began at 10:02 a.m. this morning. Coddington was declared unconscious at 10:08 a.m. and was pronounced deceased at 10:16 a.m. I recognize today's events and the actions which led to them impact people in many different ways. This is especially true for the family and friends of the victim, Albert Hale. As director of the Oklahoma Department of Corrections, I am required to carry out the orders of the court in accordance with state statute. The agency has done so today with professionalism as well as respect for the process and those in its custody, ensuring dignity for all that were involved. Do you have questions?
Director, when the curtain raises right at 10, the inmate is already restrained and has his IVs placed. When are those IVs placed?
Those IVs are placed just minutes before the chamber or the curtain is raised. There's a process that goes prior to the curtain being raised, and it's a part of that process. So within 30 to 45 minutes of that time frame.
Excellent. And just one clarification: in the packet we got when we got here today, it was listing the 3 drug protocol. It listed for this execution rocuronium, bromide. I believe we've heard ecuronium in the past. Can you explain that?
Yes. Rocuronium and vorcuronium are both a part of the drug protocol. It's just a matter of selection as to which one the state chooses to use, but they are both a part of the protocol. And in this particular execution, we chose rocuronium bromide.
Do you have any of the vorcuronium bromide available? Have you even used this because you're out?
It is not because we're out. It's just the selection that we chose today was rocuronium.
So this is your last one?
This actually will be the last execution that I'm involved in as director. Actually, as you've probably seen, I have a retirement date that's upcoming, and I go on leave starting the end of next week.
Given that, sir, do you have any overall impressions to impart with us about how it's gone overall?
No, sir. It's been a tedious process over the last couple of years with the litigation and things that the state has went through to make sure that this process is refined. I've been a large part of those processes in refining and looking at policies, the protocol, and all of the pieces or the moving parts of this process. And I feel very, very confident today that the state is able to carry out the execution protocol in accordance with state statute and policy. And the department is, the staff that are involved in the process are very trained in the process. So I am very confident in the state's ability, the department's ability to carry out the protocol with executions.
Were there any issues, or did everything go as planned?
Absolutely no issues. The execution today went in accordance with the protocol with no issues at all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Director. At this time, we're going to hear from Mitchell Hale, who's the son of the victim, and he'll be here to address you about today.
Well, obviously we would prefer not to be here today, but I felt like it was important that we come just to represent my dad. I didn't want this to go without us being here for my dad. There's so much emphasis put on the perpetrator and not the victim that I just felt compelled that we had to be here. Trust me, I don't want to be here. A lot of talk about closure. There's no such thing as that. And when you've dealt with this, today's not a good day. It's not a bad day. It's just a new day for our family. We can finally move on. It's not going to heal anything, but it closes this chapter. We're not going to be called to say, well, there's a new hearing, and there's a new trial, there's a new clemency. This is finally over. And that's the only thing we wanted, was just everything to stop. Unless you've been inside this system on the victim side, you don't understand how you just get kicked around like a football. No one cares about us. It's always the criminal side. So that's the only reason we're here today. There was no reason. I didn't take any joy in watching this, but I had to be here for my dad.
Mr. Hale, you said during the clemency hearing that his actions caused your family to not be as close as it once was. Is it possible following today that you helped repair it, or do you think he caused permanent damage to your family in terms of closeness?
Well, permanent. I mean, we all grew up on a farm, and that farmhouse was the center of our world. And when he took that away from us, I mean, there's no anchor spot for my family anymore. So no, it'll never be repaired because this didn't change any of that.
Sir, did you ever believe his remorse was genuine or not?
Well, he proved today that it wasn't genuine. I mean, his final statement, he thanked his girlfriend and his attorneys, but he never apologized. He never mentioned my dad. He never mentioned my family. So there was no true remorse. I mean, he forgave Governor Stitt, which Governor Stitt didn't have anything to do with any of this. The court system is why he's here, and his actions. But no, he didn't have any real remorse. I mean, he sold it well, and his attorneys sold it well to the clemency board, but there was no remorse. He didn't bring up my dad. He didn't bring up family. I know him. I mean, so no, there was no remorse. He proved it today.
You said today you're here for your dad. What would you like people to know about your dad?
What do I want them to know about my dad? He was a great man. I mean, I don't know what else to say. Pillar of the community. I mean, there's a hole in our little town. He owned the cafe. Everybody came every morning. I mean, he changed that whole dynamics of the little town I grew up. So other than he was just a friendly, accepting guy. Kind of had, a soft spot for the, downtrodden, and instilled that in us to look out for a fellow man. And it didn't work out for him doing that, but I'm not going to stop. I mean, that's how we were raised. He's just a good man.
You had said that in the clemency hearing that you gave James Coddington. How do you wrestle with that if you think he has no remorse? How do you forgive him when he has no remorse?
First, the forgiveness isn't for James Coddington. The forgiveness is for me. I mean, you're carrying this burden with you for so long. 25 years this thing's been going on. And after a while, you realize that the hatred isn't affecting him in any way, but it sure was affecting me, and I just finally had to just let it go and just, I forgive him, but that doesn't release him from, consequences of his actions. Forgiveness doesn't change in that course, but it's forgiveness is more for the individual, not who they're forgiving. For me, my own well-being, I guess.
So, did you or Coddington make eye contact at all? Or
Today?
communication? Yes.
No. I don't know that that would even been physically possible. I mean, we're behind a mirrored window, but no, he pretty much just looked up and then at the preacher and stuff. No.
All right, if there's no more questions.
Thank you, sir.
We're going to hear from our first media witness. It'll be Sean Murphy from the Associated Press.
Hey everybody, my name's Sean Murphy. I'm with the Associated Press. I'm just going to run down what I basically witnessed. There were 5 media witnesses, obviously. There were also 2 women from the Federal Public Defender's Office, and then the Governor's Cabinet Secretary for Public Safety, Tricia Everest, was also in with us. I also saw Dr. Urban Yen enter and sit behind us with the victim's family. So the curtain was raised at 10 a.m. Right on time, and Coddington was asked if he had any last words, and he said, "Yes, sir. To all my family and friends, lawyers, everyone who's been around me and loved me, thank you." And he listed off the names of several people and said, "I love you all." He said, "You gave me 2 years of complete love and happiness." I'm not certain who he said that to. He also said, "Governor Stitt, I don't blame you and I forgive you." He thanked his attorney, Emma Rolls, and said, "I love you." And then he was asked if that was the conclusion of his remarks, and he said, "That's it, sir." Then the execution began at about 10:01. He looked over at his lawyer a number of times, gave a thumbs up. He appeared at 10:03. He appeared to be talking. The mic was cut off, so we couldn't hear what he was saying, but his lips were moving and his eyes were blinking. 10:04, his cheeks began to flutter a bit. He exhaled heavily a couple of times, and his chest kind of hitched or heaved several times. 10:05, his eyelids began to droop. 10:06, his chest was still moving. The doctor came in at about 10:07 to do the consciousness check, and I saw him shake Mr. Coddington. At 10:08, he was declared unconscious. We could hear him snoring because they turned the mic on to announce that he was unconscious. 10:08, his chest was still moving. 10:09, his breathing became more labored. And then around 10:09, he appeared to stop breathing. 10:13, his face kind of became a darker color. He wasn't breathing at this point. His mouth and his eyes were slightly open. Doctor entered at 10:15, checked for a heartbeat, and flashed a light in his eyes. And then Director Crow came in and pronounced him dead at 10:16. So, any questions?
You've done this multiple times. Anything unusual this time, or did it go as typically what they expect, especially after those incidents?
Yeah, I think so. I think with the midazolam that you see that labored breathing. you see the chest kind of hitch or heave a little bit. It wasn't, it wasn't a dramatic heave where his body came up. Just you could just kind of tell the breathing was labored. But I would think that it's pretty par for the course of a bedazzling execution. Okay, thank you.
Nolan Clay from the Oklahoman.
Thank you, Sean. Relayed the times pretty well. We went over them. Dr. Heath, Don Heath was the spiritual advisor. He had a suit on. He had a white stole or shawl. He read from a Bible. He stood at inmates by the inmate's side at his feet. There was another corrections officer in there to watch him. That officer was masked, but there wasn't any problem. At one point, inmate Coddington said some things, and Heath nodded in like an agreement. I saw Emma Rose, his attorney. She was on the front row. She was crying a lot, but I saw her mouth something like "I love you" to him, and that's when he kind of gave the thumbs up. Perspective, Dr. Yin's been there for 3 other executions. The last time I saw him in there, he was in the row with us. This time he was in the back. The breathing was somewhat more labored than the other 2 modern executions I've seen, but it was, as Sean said, it wasn't dramatically labored, and I didn't see any real issues.
How would you describe Coddington's emotions?
Well, that is a good question, because we kind of expected from how remorseful that he was at his clemency hearing that we would see some expression of remorse. We didn't at all. It was the statements were "I love you," the family and friends, the reference to Angela, which we took was his fiance or girlfriend. He referenced his attorney. He never once said anything about the crime, but he spoke in of a loud voice. He wasn't hard to hear. He looked up most of the time, and when he said, when they asked him if that was it, he said, "That's it, sir," assertively. And but I was surprised I didn't hear any expressions of remorse, because we kind of expected that. Any other questions?
Next, we'll hear from Amanda Gilbert from Fox 23.
And it's A-M-A-N-D-A, and then Gilbert, G-I-L-B-E-R-T. One thing I wanted to bring up, Emma Rolls, his lawyer, was visibly upset, I'd say even before things started. She had tears in her eyes, definitely most of the, if not all of the time this happened. Everything started on time, and then the speech that Coddington gave, I would say it lasted about a minute, almost a minute, around 10:01. One thing I will add to the speech, I believe the very last thing Coddington said before he was done was, "Angela, it's fabulous. I love you." We believe Angela is someone he knew during his time in prison, possibly a girlfriend. We don't have that confirmed. But again, yeah, he said, "Angela, it's fabulous. I love you." And that was one of the last things he said. Then he spoke with his spiritual advisor. I will say during that time, Coddington seemed to focus a lot of his time on his lawyer, Emma. They definitely looked at each other a lot. He wiggled his fingers at Emma and gave her a thumbs up at one point, and that almost seemed to be more for her, since she was obviously very upset. I would say around 10:08 is when they made sure that he was asleep, and we could hear snoring when they brought the mic back up, which, as you were saying earlier, is important because that shows us that he was breathing when he was asleep still. So that happened around 10:08. Before that time, two of us could not see the clock where it was positioned, so it was a little difficult to get times, but we also noticed eyes fluttering, that heaving at one point, that labored breathing just for a few moments. It never looked like his eyes fully closed, but I think that was just the angle we were at. And then, around 10:15, the doctor came in and checked for heartbeats, checked his pupils, and he was pronounced dead at 10:16. So.
Did Emma Rolls say anything, or was she just mostly emotional?
Nope, mostly just emotional. Just definitely use the Kleenex. And
was he looking at her through the glass or through a window? I thought he couldn't see anyone on the other side.
he could see us. Yeah, he was looking at her through glass. Mm-hmm.
Did he make any eye contact with you guys? Or?
I don't think so. He focused his attention when he looked out, which was not much at Emma. So.
Augusta McDonald from KWTV9.
Thank you. Just a few things to add from beyond what other media witnesses have already talked about. I would agree in the first 6 or 7 minutes while he was losing consciousness, there were several kind of like heaving chest. His chest was sort of glitching as he was breathing. That was noted. His cheeks kind of puffed on exhale a few times, and he was looking over at Emma Rolls, who was sitting right in front of us at the first row. So he's kind of like looking down his body at her, making eye contact. He kind of, wiggled his fingers, and she was highly upset, sitting with another staffer from the Federal Public Defender's Office. Doctor came in, shook him, checked to see if he was unconscious about 10:08. I would say, going a little out of order, the only additional thing from what we've already gone through in terms of his last words, he listed some names. He started out, "Yes, sir," to all of my family, friends, and attorneys, everyone who loved me, James, Duffy, Monica, Lily, and Latori. I love you all. He said, "You gave me 2 years of complete love and happiness." And then Governor Stitt, "I don't blame you and I forgive you." He thanked his attorney, Emma Rolls, and then listed several names: Emma, Julie, Tamara, Dawn. And then said, "Angela, it's fabulous. I love you." And then he said, "That's all." And then his last words were, "That's it, sir." And then Don Heath, kind of reading from the Bible, there was some interaction between Don and Coddington as he was laying there. He sort of, Heath was reading, Coddington was sort of, he was speaking a little bit before he was unconscious, and there seemed to be some sort of interaction we could really hear. I was also in a position where I could not see a clock, so I don't have times. And then I just kind of witnessed him, his face after the second drug was administered, kind of starting to turn purple or blue near the end. So by the end, when he was declared dead at 10:16, his features were very purple and pale. They checked his eyes and his heart, and again, Scott Crow said time of death at 10:16.
But you couldn't hear anything Donovan said at all, right?
Sorry?
You couldn't hear anything Donovan said. He was totally muted.
No, he was muted. He was reading from the Bible. And so there was some reading, and then there were some words he said also. He was just speaking to Coddington outside of some sort of scripture. Okay.
The last media witness we'll hear from this morning is Chris Polanski from KWGS Radio.
Hey, KWGS, we're the NBR station in Tulsa. I'm Chris Polanski. I have very little to add from what everyone's already said. Shortly after the first drug was administered, I did notice I had a very good view of Mr. Coddington's, the left side of his neck. I noticed his neck tremored rather quickly for a little bit there. That continued for about a minute, maybe a little bit less. Like I believe Sean said already, at 10:09, just before 10:10 is when I clocked him as having taken his last breath. His neck at that point, I could see a pulse. I could see he continued to have a pulse, and I saw that movement stop right about a minute later at 10:11. Shortly after the Director Crow declared the time of death and that the execution was complete, the curtain closed. We waited to be escorted out. There were some flashes from behind the curtain, which I took to be like someone taking pictures or a team taking pictures. And just a few spare details. I made exceptionally brief eye contact with Mr. Coddington right when the curtain raised, but it was, I believe, while he was looking for Emma Rolls, his attorney, who he then spent all his focus on. When the curtain raised initially, it was, I believe, Justin Ferris, Chief of Operations for DOC, and he was the one who read the death warrant while standing over Mr. Coddington. His face was uncovered. The Reverend Don Heath's face was uncovered. There was a member of the execution team in there as well, wearing kind of like a light blue balaclava, sort of ski mask kind of thing. You could just see his eyes. And the doctor, who was off in a side room, was wearing a classic doctor's white coat and a stethoscope around his neck, but when he came in, he was wearing the same sky blue balaclava. You could just make out the doctor's eyes. That's all I have.
So it is now 10 minutes after 11. I know that some of you have noon shots to do. Some of you maybe have an 11 o'clock broadcast going on as well. What we're going to do is try to return to normal prison operations in 25 minutes. So what we're going to do is ask if you need to go set up a shot that's going to take place after that, please go do it outside the gates. Otherwise, you can pack up and hang out. But we're going to try to get everybody clear of here by 11:35. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.